Hey guys and girls, in this lesson I want to show you how to access my personal Dzen library, which contains several exported functions that detect candlestick patterns. Now, we will cover libraries in a future lesson in its own section, its own category in the course, because there is a lot to cover with libraries. But for today's lesson, we'll keep it very simple, and all we're going to do is import my library and then use some of my functions in that library to detect some of the candlestick patterns that I've shown you in the previous lessons in this section. So the first thing we need to do before we can access any library is import that library. So I'm going to import my Dzen library. To do that, we use the import keyword, and then we need to reference the library kind of URL to the script. So in this case, I want to import this is my username, my TradingView username. So Dzen and the art of trading, and then I can press Control space or Command space on a Mac, and it will list all of my publicly published libraries. I only have one at the moment, and that is my Dzen library. Now you can see here that it has the number 1 at the end of this sort of URL. The current version as of recording this lesson is actually 2. So I need to put 2. I need to change the version number of the script to 2. Now, by the time you watch this video, depending on how long it has been since I recorded this video, there may be a newer version of this script. Just go to the TradingView platform and look up this Dzen library script to see what the latest version is. Otherwise, I'll try to keep the course content in the library section up to date with the latest version. So anyway, here we have our Dzen library version 2 imported. The final thing to do is import this with a keyword that we can use to reference this library. So to do that, we just type out as. So we use the import Dzen library as keyword, AS. And then here we can put in a nickname for this library. So I'm just going to call mine Dzen. You could call it Z or X or whatever you want. I'm going to just stick with Dzen. And that's it. If I save my code, we are now successfully importing this library. Now all that's left to do is detect some patterns. Now I'm just going to copy and paste some of this code over to speed up the lesson. Let's start with our bullish and bearish engulfing candles. So before we continue, let me just show you how you would normally do this. If you write Dzen and then a dot and then Control space or Command space, you'll get a list of all of the functions that exist within my Dzen library. There's a bunch here. I'll cover what all of these do in its own lesson, specific to the Dzen library. For today's lesson, we just want to focus on our candlestick patterns. So you can see that we have hammers, stars, dojis, bullish engulfing candles, and bearish engulfing candles. And all of these candlestick patterns take optional parameters. Now these parameters are completely optional. I'll explain what they all do as we go through the lesson today. But for now, let me just click on bullish easy. I won't bother putting in any parameters. We'll just get the default bullish engulfing candle that I've written my code to detect. And now we can draw this data onto our chart. So I'm just using the plot shape function with a triangle up, triangle down style, color of green and red for bullish and bearish. And I've got the text here, east, to let us know that this is an engulfing candle that we are detecting. So now if I save my code, we should be getting a bunch of bullish and bearish engulfing candles being detected. So let me drop down to a 4-hour time frame. Here we go. So now we have all of our bullish and bearish engulfing candle patterns detected. Now this code simply detects the pattern itself. It doesn't combine any filters with this. So for example, if you wanted the bullish, let's go with bearish. If you want the bearish engulfing candle to be a swing high, for example, you would need to say and then your condition. So for example, we could add a check on here. Maybe we want swing high, bearish engulfing candles. So I could set this condition to ta.highest high over the past 20 bars, for example. Let's save the script. And now we will only be detecting major swing high bearish engulfing candles. So these functions simply detect the pattern. It's up to you to add the filters you want to combine that pattern with. Now, before we continue, let's go over some of these parameters we have to work with. So the first one is allowance. So allowance is the point allowance for gaps in price action. So if I zoom in really close here, let's try and find an example. It's pretty hard to find an example of this because it is a rare occurrence. But basically what can happen sometimes with these candlesticks on certain data feeds is the bar that opens to engulf this previous bar can sometimes open 1 point above the close of that previous bar. Literally 1 point, so a fraction of a pip above the close. And that would negate the pattern because it's no longer an engulfing candle pattern because the candle didn't open lower than the previous close. This point allowance overrides that, so by default it's set to 0. But if you set this to 1, for example, that would mean that if price opened on this second bar 1 point, so right there, 1 point above the previous bar, it would still be considered a valid engulfing candle because to the naked eye, it would look like an engulfing candle. But obviously, our code does exactly what we tell it to. And if there is a tiny, tiny gap between the close and the open, that pattern will be ignored. This setting here, this point allowance setting, is used to override that if you want to. Next up, we have rejection wick size. This is the rejection wick compared to the body, and it's a rejection against the engulfing candle itself. So here's a good example right here. You can see that this engulfing candle, this bearish engulfing candle, has a gigantic rejection wick. Bulls push price right back up on this bar. Depending on how you're trading these patterns, this might not be an ideal situation. This could be a lower probability indication of price action rolling over. In this case, price did roll over, but in many cases, if there's a large rejection wick like this, you might not want to take this trade. So if I set this to 2, for example, if I set, let me do it on the bearish version. If I set rejection wick size to 2, that means that any bar that has a rejection wick size that is 2 times the size of the body will be ignored. So now if I save the code, this setup should go away. There we go. So that's what that's for. The final parameter here is engulf wick. So that's a Boolean value. And this just means that the bar must engulf the previous wick. So let me find an example where this doesn't happen. Here's a good one. Notice that this bearish engulfing candle here does not engulf the previous wick. The body does not engulf the previous wick. So if I set this to true on our bearish engulfing candles and save my code, this setup will go away because it does not engulf the wick. So that's what our parameters do for bullish and bearish engulfing candles. Let's move on to some other patterns. So the next couple of patterns I detect in my library script is hammers and stars. So let me align these to be a little neater. So we have hammers and stars here. So let me copy over my plot shape code. And now if I save the script will be detecting hammers and stars. So there's a star, hammer, hammer. This might be easier if I turn off our bullish engulfing candles. Now you can see the script is detecting hammers and stars all over the place. Again, you will need to add your own conditions to these patterns if you want to, such as indicator conditions and price action conditions, to make sure that these patterns are detected in tradable zones and not just in the middle of nowhere like this, depending on how you want to trade this particular pattern. Now, this function also has a couple of parameters. The first one is the fib level. So if you've watched the hammer and star lesson, you'll know what this means. If you haven't, I would suggest you take the time to watch that, especially if you want to trade these patterns, because I explain in great detail in that lesson how I detect these patterns. But if I set the fib to 0.25, for example, 0.25, now we are only detecting hammers and stars where the body closes in the lower 25% mark of the candle. So if I pull that down to there, I have this fib set to 33.3, but if you set that to 0.25, the line would be even lower. And that is what the fib parameter does in this particular candlestick function. The next parameter is color match. So that means that the color must match. So if I set that to true on both of these, so now if I save the script, hammer candles need to be green, so this will go away since it's red, and star candles need to be red, so this will go away because it's green. So now if I save the code, some of these will disappear, but turn off my engulfing candles. Now we're only detecting bearish or red shooting stars and green or bullish hammers. Now the reason why this is off by default is because in my testing I've found that hammers and stars, if they close in the upper and lower third of the bar, it generally doesn't affect the accuracy of the pattern very much. And so by default, this is set to false, but you can override that if you want to in the parameters for this function. Now, the final pattern we have here is dojis. So if I paste that over, we're now getting doji candles. Let's draw these onto the chart. And I'm going to comment out all of these other patterns for now and get rid of these parameters, save my code. Now we should be getting a blue cross above any doji candles. There's one there. Doji, couple down here. And so that's what this function is for. Let's have a look at some of the parameters. So this function only takes two parameters, wick size and body size. So just like in the doji lesson, in where I showed you how I detect doji candles, the wick size means the wick size in relation to the other wick. So if one wick is greater than this number times the other wick, then the script will not detect it as a doji. So for example, if I set this to 2, that means that if the wick on this side was greater than 2 times the size of this wick, the candle would not be detected as a doji. So that's what that option is for. The next parameter is body size. So this is a percentage of the total candle. So by default, it's set to 0.05, so 5%. The candle body cannot be greater than 5% of the total candle size, but you can override that here if you want to. So I could set this to 0.10, for example. That would be 10%. The doji can be 10% of the candle body size, and we'll be getting a bunch more dojis being detected. Anyway, that's it for this lesson. I hope you found this interesting. We'll cover this in more detail in a future lesson when we get to libraries. I'll cover all of the functions in the Dzen library in more detail. But for now, those are the candlestick patterns that you can borrow, essentially, from my own scripts, my own library, so that you don't need to write out the code for detecting all of these candlestick patterns if you don't want to. As I said earlier at the beginning of the lesson, you will need to add your own conditional filters to these patterns. So if you want them to be detected as swing highs, swing lows, during pullbacks, or at price extremes when the RSI is overbought or oversold, or any other indicator condition above or below a moving average, etc., you'll need to add that code in yourself. All this code does is detect the simple candlestick pattern with no filters applied. Anyway, that'll do it for this lesson. I will speak with you in the next one. Take care.